back, relax, and maybe get yourself a snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hi guys! So I'm here today to do the answers part of my Q&A because I recently did a video where I asked if you guys could give me questions so that I can answer them because I hit 10,000 subscribers, and in that video I thanked you guys and I told you all sorts of updates, so if you've not seen it you can go watch it, I'll link it. But basically I am doing a lot better at the moment. Thank you all so much for your kind wishes after my last video where I said I'd had an operation on my ear. I'm doing a lot better now than I was. I'm actually filming with lights and stuff again. I've set everything up. I'm still off work but only for a few more days and then I'm going back to work. So hopefully it all stays good and positive. And my ear is healing up quite nicely. It's a bit gross at the moment so I won't show you guys, but it's getting there, and I think hopefully once I've had my next doctor's appointment I'll be able to know if the hearing has come back, because that's the thing I still don't know, but I'm hoping that, fingers crossed, it will have. On with the answers video. Let's talk answers. You guys asked quite a few questions on the comments section and then I also was tweeted some, so I'm just gonna go through what I've got and answer it for you, and hopefully you guys like it. There will also be a bookshelf tour coming. I am going to completely do all my shelves for you guys. I've been promising it, it's gonna happen, but I need to wait until my boyfriend is around to help me because it's quite a big job to film a bookshelf tour, so that will be coming as soon as I possibly can get it to you. So the first question I have is from What Cass Read. I'll link her channel below, and she asks, now that you have 10,000 subscribers, what advice would you give to your 100 subscriber self on BookTube? And I think BookTube has changed a lot in the time since I started. So when I started it was a really small thing and it was quite niche. I mean, it still is compared to some things like gaming and beauty on YouTube, but it was just a super small community. Everyone pretty much knew everyone when I started, especially in the science fiction and fantasy realm of it, because it was so incredibly small. I barely knew anyone else who was talking about the same things that I was when I started. It's grown exponentially now, so it's definitely a different world, and because it's grown, more people find things, it's a lot easier to find things, it's also a lot harder to stand out in the crowd. So I think nowadays if I was starting and I had 100 subscribers and I was trying to sort of break in, I think the only bit of advice that I would give that I could say possibly would help is just enjoy it and do it because you love it, because you can't go into BookTube for money. It doesn't really happen that way, sadly. I would love if this was my full-time job and that I could do this on a daily basis and talk to you guys and read and just get so into the bookish world. I would love that, but it isn't that. And I think a lot of people nowadays start channels with the intention of that, or with the intention of getting free books, or with the intention of kind of just going into it as a career, and it's so incredibly hard to do that, and you have to be very lucky and you have to be very dedicated to get into that situation of having the ability to do it as your job. So my bit of advice would be to just do it because you love it. Talk to people on other channels and communicate with them. Tell them you're interested in their videos and have discussions about the books that they're talking about. If you want to do something different, do something different. If you want to just do the standard book hauls, book reviews, tags, wrap-ups, it's totally your choice. I think as long as you enjoy it and you have fun in the community, that is always going to be the best part of BookTube for me, and I think pretty much everyone else I know. So that would be my bit of advice. That was rambly. I'm going to have to try and be quicker for the other questions. Okay, the next question I have is from A Bookish Balance, and they ask, what job do you have? So maybe you don't know, you guys, but I actually work in publishing. I work for an academic publisher in the UK, fairly small one, but quite a prolific one. They've won lots of awards and they're very fun. It's a great company that I work for, and I'm an editor there, and I edit books on a daily basis, so particularly law and economics books. I do not have any knowledge of law and economic books. I just work on the text and editing it, grammar, etc., doing cover designs, getting all of that sort of stuff done. It's very interesting. I enjoy it a lot. It's a very small company and it's really nice to work in a small company The next question is from Chris Bookish Cauldron, and he says, what book would you love to see adapted to screen, either as a TV show or as a film? Now this one is a hard one, but I was thinking about this and I've actually had some discussions with people about the series that I'm going to say, and that is The Live Ship Traders by Robin Hobb. This is a 3-book series. It is part of the Realm of the Eldlings. However, of all of the different books in the Realm of the Eldlings, this is the series that kind of stands on its own away from the others most. So it's kind of its own story. It does tie in loosely, but there is not a huge crossover between this and the other books in the Realm of the Eldlings. So in terms of a mini BBC 6 or 10 episode drama maybe, I think the Live Ship books would work really well. And I remember a couple years ago when I was reading them having this very discussion with Mercedes, and I think also with Sam from Sam's Nonsense, and we were both just all chatting about it and saying how epic it would be to have a Robin Hobb TV series, and we think that this one would be much more doable than her overall Fits in the Fall general series, because it's more manageable and it would work easier, and there are so many great characters. It would definitely be like a series that they could make happen. There's really great visual effects nowadays, so they could do all of the dragons and the wizard wood, and it would just be awesome if they did it right. I'm really worried that if it ever did get made, it would be done wrong and I'd be sad, which wouldn't be good. But if I could ever get it made perfectly, it would be that series, I think. Next, I have a couple of different questions from this person called Avocada, I think. So I'm going to answer them all. They are, how did you get into fantasy? Which first fantasy book or series made you want to read more fantasy? Was there anyone in my family who got me into reading? Do you have any plans of writing books? So let's break it down. How I got into fantasy. I actually was always into fantasy. I've enjoyed things like Harry Potter when I was a young kid, so that's always been there. But if you wanted to know about how I got into adult fantasy, that was purely down to Brandon Sanderson's book. When I started my channel, which was a couple years ago, it was the year I started university, I was into fantasy by then, but I wasn't hugely into it. I'd read a couple of things, and I read like Peter V. Brett's series, and I'd read some Sanderson, but not a lot, and I'd read some Joe Abercrombie, but not a lot. So there were a couple authors that I knew who are nowadays famous in fantasy, but I'd just sort of touched on them. Of those 3 authors, I think it was definitely Sanderson who really got me hooked, because once I read the Mistborn series, oh, I was into it. I was so into it. I read Elantris first, and I loved Elantris, and then I went and picked up more books by him, this same author, and I loved them. And my mum got me some books, I remember, from like Cassandra Clare and people like that. So I'd read other things in the genre, but definitely it was Sanderson whose books got me into fantasy. Was there anyone in my family who got me into reading? I suppose my mum and my dad both read to me as a child, but neither of them are huge readers now. They do read, but they're not massively into it. I think it was just me, really. Like, I just enjoyed reading, and when I was going to college, I started reading more because I had a journey where I would walk to the train station for 20 minutes, get on the train for another 10 or so, and then I would walk another 10 or so the other side. So it was quite a long journey, and I could listen to audiobooks, and I could read on my Kindle and read on the train a book, and I just thought that that was great, so that's what I did. And I had a friend at the time who I'm still friends with who was also a reader, so we used to get the train together and we used to actually just sit and read our books instead of talking, and I think that was where it all started to kind of get more vital in my life. It started to become more of a thing, but it wasn't until I went to university and started my channel that I got hugely obsessed, which I am now. Do I have any plans of writing a book? No, absolutely not. I do not have any plans to write anything. I enjoy writing every now and then. I love writing reviews. I like writing just general article pieces. I think that would be fine. But an actual fantasy book is hard work. I've seen people try and do it and fail, and I've seen people who have done a great job on it, and I'm just in awe of how they do it. I don't know if I could have the dedication to sit down and write something, because I don't think that's what I want to do. I really enjoy taking someone else's story and editing it and making it better and making it something that it's meant to be, and just moulding and crafting it and working with that person to improve a story. I think that's definitely my calling. Like, I love doing that. I do not think I am meant to write them necessarily. I will never say never, but I don't plan to. Next up, I have some questions from His Neverland. So the first one of these questions is, where do you find out about all your new fantasy releases? So this is quite a good question. So I use all sorts of different things to find out about new releases. I use Amazon because Amazon's very good at telling you things that are coming up by authors you've already read. It gives you like recommendations, so that's good. Goodreads does the same thing. It will tell you different books by authors that you've already read, and it will tell you their new one that's coming up. So those are two places that are quite helpful. But if I want to find out, like, generally speaking, what's coming up, I use lots of different bloggers who do anticipated lists. I think there are quite a lot of bloggers who I enjoy reading stuff by, but I tend to frequent the Book Smugglers. I think they're great. I enjoy Fantasy Faction and the Fantasy Hive, which are two sort of fantasy-based blog websites where they've got all sorts of different articles. Many of them are about cover reveals for books that are coming up, or kind of interviews with authors who are going to be releasing things. So I find out a lot through them and their Twitter accounts. And I also find out a lot of new releases from just going on publisher catalogues. I think that is the main source of where I find out what is coming up. So basically, if you know a publisher, you like a publisher, for example, I read a lot of books from Orbit and Galance and Harper Voyager. So if I know that I like their books, then I tend to every so often go and visit their website, and then usually at the bottom there will be a screen that says something like catalogue for 2018, 2017, something like that, or spring catalogue, autumn catalogue, something like that. And these are all free to access to anyone. You don't have to be like a reviewer, you can just go on the website and see what they've got coming up. So I do that quite frequently, and especially before I make a most anticipated video, I will go and look at all of those lists. Of course, I do use everyone else's lists of most anticipated books on BookTube, so if I see other people start uploading them, then I will definitely go and watch other people's videos and get ideas from there that I may not have heard of myself. So yeah, I think those are the main sources. And then of course I am in the position where I'm quite lucky and I get sent lots of books pre-release. So I know about them sometimes from the publishers emailing me or the authors tweeting me and offering me books. So I do get that as a special advantage. But all of the other places, definitely anyone could find them. So I'll link loads of those links that I mentioned down below if you want to go and find more out about them. And then the other one that this person has asked is, are there any books that you had a wrong impression of going in and so you were disappointed by them? Plenty, I'm sure. There were actually a video that I did which is like 7 books I really didn't like, and I think there were a couple in that video that I just really really had the wrong expectations going in. Any that I DNF disappoint me. Any that I end up giving like less than 2 stars really disappoint me. So I don't do it that often, but occasionally, yes. Next up, I have a question from A Bear and a Bee Books Samantha, and she asks, what are your favourite hobbies outside of reading? This is a tricky one because I don't have an awful lot of hobbies outside of reading. So I attend book groups, which I guess is definitely related to reading, and I attend lots of book events which are also related to reading. I do some conventions, they're all reading related. I just realised everything in my life is reading related. But yeah, I love going to conventions, I love going out with friends. I am in my local Rotaract group, which is basically the younger version of the Rotary Club, and it basically is like a charity group where we organise different days for supporting charities. So I do that on my time off, and I also spend a lot of time with friends from that group. We go on socials, so we have drinks, we do food crawls, we do laser quest, bowling, cinema, all sorts of things like that. So I do get time to just go out with friends. I also spend time with my boyfriend too, so we have a good time doing all sorts of things. And yeah, I do stuff outside of reading. Just most of my life is kind of revolving around reading. I work in publishing, I read all the things, I review all the things, but I do some other things outside of it, just not a lot. I don't watch TV, I don't really listen to music, I'm not big on those things, so they don't detract from reading time. I end up with so much reading time and I can read a lot. Next up, I have a question from Zoe Beck, and she says, was there a book that you picked up that completely changed your reading once you read it? So this is a hard one because I think lots of books really inspire me or really connect with me, but there are a couple that I I think stand out for various reasons. So one of them is The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin, and I'm sad to say this now that she's just recently passed away, but she was amazing, and unfortunately I only read a couple of her books while she was alive, although I fully intend to read plenty more of them. But The Left Hand of Darkness was the first one I read by her, and it was kind of a revelation moment for me where I realised that science fiction, particularly older science fiction, didn't need to be really intimidating, because a lot of the science fiction I'd read up till then was hard SF. It was really intense, very difficult to read and tricky, and I felt like I was confused. And when I read her book, I realised that actually science fiction can be for anyone. It's just I wasn't reading the right stuff. I wasn't reading the authors who were going to appeal to me, and she was an author who was going to appeal to me and who really changed my reading when it came to science fiction. So now I tend to read mostly her and other women who were writing in like the 80s and 90s for science fiction, or newer fiction that's coming out like Becky Chambers. Those sorts of science fiction reads I think have definitely been shaped by that one book and realising that I could read science fiction. So expect to see some more science fiction kind of coming your way from my channel in the next few months, because I'm kind of on a bit of a binge with it at the moment. I've read a couple this month, so you'll see some reviews. But yeah, I've been really enjoying that. Non-fiction is another thing. I didn't used to really read non-fiction at all, and then I started reading memoirs. I can't even remember which one I started off with, but maybe something like Anne Frank's diary, and then I read the memoirs of people who had escaped from North Korea, and all of these really hard-hitting things. I love hard-hitting, terrible subjects for some reason, and memoirs definitely started to be something that I enjoyed more. So you probably may have noticed if I ever read non-fiction, it's usually a memoir, not always, but I'd say a good 80% of the time. So those are probably books that did change my reading somewhat. In the fantasy genre, it's much harder for me to tell you that because I've always loved fantasy, I think. Next, I have a question from Orderwide D, and this question is, what is your favourite fantasy movie or TV show and favourite sci-fi movie or TV show? So this is a hard question because I've not actually watched that many. I'm not hugely into TV and films, but some of the ones I've enjoyed recently, I love Game of Thrones. I really like the books, so I enjoy the TV show, and I also enjoyed Westworld when that was on. I thought that was really, really good, and I'm intrigued about possibly going back and reading the original work that it was based on, because I think they're possibly quite different. I don't really watch that many. I like Firefly, that's a really good one, and I liked Torchwood when that was on, although I'm not a big Doctor Who fan. I haven't watched too many of them, if I'm honest. Film-wise, I love Harry Potter's. I enjoyed Fantastic Beasts, I like that one. I like the Hobbit films, controversial I know, but I did. And Lord of the Rings. So most of the stereotypical ones I liked, I guess. A couple more questions I have from Ange S. She asks, do you annotate your books? Or how do you keep track of the details from so many similar fantasy books? And I don't annotate my books. I have in the past tried putting the sticky note labels in where you can like tab sentences that you like and stuff, and I've enjoyed doing that, but I never have them to hand when I'm reading. I sit in my bed and I read, and I never have them near me for some reason. So I just tend to read my books. I don't really annotate them or take notes or anything like that. I just store it all in my head. In terms of how I separate out fantasy, I genuinely don't know. I just have the brain for it, I guess. I read lots of fantasy books, and I'm quite good at glossing over the details that I don't need to remember and remembering the things I do need to remember. I don't know if that's just because I've read so many of them, so I'm quite good at spotting the patterns, or what it is. I do tend to try and read different types of fantasy alongside one another, so when I say I read fantasy all the time, that's true, but I don't always read the same type. So I'll usually have an epic fantasy on the go, I might have an urban fantasy on the go, or a steampunk, or a short story collection, or a short story novella, or a non-fiction on the go at the same time. So I read multiple things, but they're all kind of different, if that makes sense. I don't know if that helps you or not. Mel's Bookland Adventures asks, if you could commission an artwork for any fantasy or sci-fi series to illustrate the reading, which one would you choose? And I thought this was a really interesting sort of question, because from the Harry Potter books that we've recently had, which are being illustrated by Jim Kay, I can see just how much illustration brings a story to life in front of your eyes, and I think they're stunning. So if it was an illustrator who was just as good as Jim Kay and was doing an excellent job and taking their time, I would love to see some Robin Hobb. I mean, I really enjoy Jackie Morris's illustrations that she does for the front covers, but I'd love to see them in the books too. I think that would be stunning. There's actually a short story collection which is called The Willful Princess and the Piebald Prince, and in there were a couple of like full page spread illustrations which were of characters from the book, and it's by a Robin Hobb and it's by Jackie Morris, and they're stunning, like so beautiful. So I would love to see a whole book with illustrations on every other page. I think there was a Game of Thrones released that was interspersed with lots of different illustrations. I think they were different illustrators actually, so that's a bit different. But yeah, Jackie Morris doing Robin Hobb would be great. Or anyone else who's great, I don't know. There's a lot of series that I think would be so cool to see, because fantasy and magic is hard to envision sometimes, and I think having that visual aid would be really cool. I like the fact that in like Sanderson's books, the Stormlight Archive books, we have illustrations from Shalon in book 2 particularly, but also in book 1 and 3, and they really help kind of enhance the story. So I love illustrations in books, and I don't know why more adult books don't do it. I think they should. Next I have a question from Books and Things, and she asks, when you were a child, what did you want to grow up and be? And I have two things I wanted to be when I was a child. The first one is a postwoman. I was very passionate that even in the rain I would get out and deliver my letters. I don't know exactly where this came from, but I really wanted to be a postwoman for a while. And then the other thing, which was a little bit later on, was a geologist. Again, I think I just had a fascination with pretty semi-precious rocks, and I thought that being a geologist meant I could just go and mine them. It's not quite the same as that, I realised later on, and decided it probably wasn't for me. So then I went to university to do a degree in graphic design, thinking I wanted to be a designer, and I ended up not being that either. I ended up working in publishing as an editor, which I'm very happy doing. Next up, a question from Vin Venture, and they ask, could you do a bit of backstory on your early reading life and how you eventually became an avid fantasy reader, and what has it meant to you? So I think I've already talked a little bit about like Harry Potter and just generally how I got into fantasy, like particularly adult fantasy, but what it means to me is something a bit different, and that is this has become my complete obsession. I love reading. I have always loved reading, but so much more now that I'm an adult and I can express myself and talk to other adults and kids about it and just spread the love of reading. I am really happy to say that I've seen my YouTube channel kind of impact other people in my life, like kids in my life. So I have a younger brother and he's 11 years old and he's a boy, and usually at around 11 that's where they stop reading or they possibly go and start doing other activities. And I'm so happy that because I have a YouTube channel which he likes to occasionally watch, he really enjoys reading still, and he thinks it's really cool and he thinks it's awesome, and I hope that that continues. I also have a cousin who lives abroad and she watches some of my videos, and she is also a really passionate reader, and I'm not saying that's because of me by any means. She was already passionate before, but I love the fact that she and I can talk about books and we can relate on that level, and I love that. Books have always been something that brings people close together, and I think particularly with kids and seeing kids get involved in reading, that's something that really inspires me and just makes me want to read more and spread the love of reading more. I love just communicating with people about books and just seeing how a book that's done well can really inspire conversation. One of the questions I got from a lot of people is, how do you make time for reading? And this is a question that I don't know how to answer, because I make time for reading by luck a lot of the time. I do a couple things that give me more time than some, but most of it is just luck and my lifestyle. So I'm currently 23. I live at my parents' house and I have my own room where I have all my books. I'd like to move out eventually, but that's not happening just yet because I need money to do that and I'm saving up. So I work as a publisher from 8 till 4 every day, and I actually finish at 3:30 sometimes because I take a shorter lunch, so I have a really great work day. I start early, but I finish early. And that means I get the rest of the afternoon to basically do what I like. I can also listen to books on my commute to and from work, and occasionally even at work if I am doing something a bit monotonous, then we're allowed music or audiobooks if we want. So that's great, I get through some books then. Outside of work, I have a lot of free time to do reading because it's a priority in my life, and my family and friends all know that I love taking time to make YouTube videos and read books so I can talk about them in videos. It's kind of my passion, so everyone around me kind of knows that and understands that. Although I do have lots of other commitments, like I've got some other groups that I'm part of, social groups, and I do things with friends, I don't do so many things that I don't have any free time. I certainly always have free time, and that allows me to read. My boyfriend and I do a little thing when we get into bed where we just sit and read for a little bit. I've trained him well, I'm really happy to say. And also, I just generally don't do an awful lot besides reading. I don't watch TV shows very often. In fact, I very rarely watch TV at all. I don't often watch films. I don't often do other activities besides reading. So reading's just mostly what I do. That's how I make time for it. It's just pretty much all I do. I have 2 more questions that I'm going to quickly answer. First one is from Victoria Hartley Cox, and this one is there a book that had a significant impact on your life? And I think this one is probably Robin Hobb. Because she was the start of realising, much in the same way that Ursula Le Guin was the start of being like, oh wow, this is amazing, science fiction is definitely for me. Robin Hobb was the start of, oh wow, there are women who write fantasy. And that was kind of a bit of a revelation, because if you go into Waterstones or your local bookshop, it's quite often hard to find the women in amongst the men, which is fine, except that when I want to read a book by a woman, it's very difficult to find them. So yeah, I really enjoyed her work. I thought she did so much better with sensitive characters than any other author I'd read to that point, and she just completely changed the way that I thought about fantasy and the way that I looked into finding fantasy by women. Before I read her, I was quite happy to just like read what was on the shelves, and then I read her and I was like, oh wow, if this is what all fantasy female writers are like, I really need to try some others. And I did, and many of them have been excellent. So she was the start of that for sure. The next and final question is from Amanda, and I will link her channel below too, and she says, what is one non-fiction book that you think everyone should read? And I am going to say for this, The Good Immigrant, which is a collection of short fiction and non-fiction all about what it is to be an immigrant into the UK. It's completely beautiful and I loved it, and you should definitely read that. The other thing that she asks is, do you still do illustrations, and what genre do you want to read more of? So this year I'm trying to read more science fiction, but yeah, I'm doing quite well with it so far. And do I do illustrations still? Not very often. I would love to get back into drawing and kind of doing art again. It's something I used to be really passionate about, but where I live currently there is not a lot of space to have a desk to draw on, and that's what I would preferably like. So until I move out, I think it's not going to be overly realistic, but when I move out, definitely plan to do more and hopefully kind of get back into listening to audiobooks and drawing at the same time, because I used to love doing that. So I really want to start that again, but hopefully once I move out that will be doable, and I'm hoping to move out like sometime soon. Sometime is very vague, I know, but like sometime soon. So yeah, that is everything I'm going to answer for now. I think I covered pretty much all the questions, but if you have anything else you want me to answer, or if there's anything I've said that's made you curious about other bits and bobs of my life, then do feel free to leave them in the comments. I'd love to hear. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all again for getting me past 10,000 subscribers and all of your love and support. I am so grateful, and I cannot wait to just keep making more videos for you guys. I've actually already filmed a couple other ones today, so you'll see me doing some reviews very soon, if not already. And that is it. That's everything I have to say. So I hope you guys have a wonderful afternoon, evening, whatever time it is where you are, and I will see you very soon in my next video. Bye guys.
Thank you for watching my video today. Go pick up a book, then come back and chat with me again.